Hello fellow YouTubers, I'm John Paiva, also known as the Bible Agent, talking about how the resurrection of Jesus Christ definitely did happen. What are some objections to the resurrection? Objection number 1, the disciples stole the body. This is probably the most popular objection to the resurrection of Jesus. Now, this is also impossible, and the reason this is impossible and couldn't have happened is because, 1, the disciples, they didn't have any means or motivation to steal the body of Jesus. So when Jesus was with them, he prophesied that one day, eventually, he would die on the cross and then resurrect. If they stole his body and continued to preach the gospel after that, that wouldn't make any sense. If these disciples who risked their lives, many were crucified or killed in other ways by professing the resurrection of Jesus, if they did that and they ended up stealing the body before, that would have been a lie. So people wouldn't behave that way on a lie. People wouldn't risk their lives for a lie. Whenever someone lies, it's because they're trying to protect themselves in some sort of way. So if the disciples stole the body of Jesus, they wouldn't have spread the gospel. They wouldn't have been spreading that Jesus resurrected from the dead. They wouldn't be saying that. It wouldn't make any sense. They didn't have any motivation to do it. They were sad after they found out Jesus had died, but they knew that he resurrected because they saw him with their own eyes. They truly believed the message, and they were very happy to see him and continued to profess the gospel after that. Not only that, but this story that the disciples stole the body, this was a theory that went around that time period itself. It says so in Matthew 28. The Pharisees fabricated the story that the soldiers were asleep, and then the disciples just snuck in and somehow took Jesus' body while all the guards were asleep. Now, this also doesn't make sense either because, 1, the grave clothes that was left behind at the tomb. Now, try to put yourself in the situation of that time period. If you were one of the disciples and you were trying to steal the body of Jesus, why go through the trouble of removing the grave clothes and then stealing the body? Why not just take it all together? We know that the clothes were there. The disciples saw it after he had already risen. And if the guards were asleep, how did they know it was the disciples that stole the body? They wouldn't have known it. If the body did get stolen, it could have been anyone. We know that Jesus' body was wrapped. This is listed in all the Gospels by Joseph of Arimathea, and it's just impossible to have happened. Objection number 2. Jesus survived the crucifixion. Alright, this one is also impossible because, 1, the Romans were very good at their job. Crucifixion was something that had existed for a long time at this point, and the Romans were experts at crucifying people. So Jesus was no different. It'd be very, very difficult to survive the crucifixion. If he somehow did survive, I think they would finish the job because they would have found that out. And crucifixion is a very long, painful process, so it's pretty impossible to survive. Now, let's say if he somehow did survive the crucifixion. Multiple people witnessed Jesus after he had died, when he resurrected. And if he did survive the crucifixion, and they saw him that way, he would have been completely maimed, beat up, injured. So that would be impossible because they saw Jesus, he looked clean, bright, and healthy, so he definitely resurrected. Objection number 3, the crucifixion never happened. Alright, so amongst historians, whether they are Christian or non-Christian, we know that Jesus Christ of Nazareth did exist and did walk the earth. Now, some people believe him to be God, as he said, and some people don't believe him to be God. But if the crucifixion never happened, there would be no Christianity. The message of the cross would be completely different. Talking about the cross wouldn't make any sense. And I actually had the pleasure twice of visiting Israel, and on both of those visits, I got to go to the garden tomb where Jesus was once buried. And they know that garden tomb to be the one because when it was excavated, it had a Knights Templar cross on it that they found, and it said Jesus Christ Alpha and Omega. It was right next to a cliff that had a skull-looking shape. So in the Bible it says Jesus was crucified in a place called Golgotha, which means place of the skull. And the reason it's called that is because on that cliff it has a very skull-looking shape. And it has, it was thousands of years ago. Even today it has a skull-looking shape, but I imagine it probably looked even more like a skull at the time of the Bible. And it was right in Jerusalem. Everything made sense. The geographical location of the Bible, the descriptions of everything, it all adds up that Jesus truly was there. Also, if he was not crucified, Jesus did die somehow, so what happened to his body? He's not buried anywhere. He's not like other famous figures that may have their grave site and might say, "Here lies so-and-so." There is no place like that for Jesus, because Jesus resurrected. He resurrected just like the apostles were saying, just like they preached. They preached that he had risen. Many of them, like I said before, they died for the faith. They died in professing the message because they believed it to be true. They were confident that it was true. Some of them saw Jesus with their own eyes, and there were still those who didn't see Jesus with their own eyes, but they still spread the gospel. And if Jesus did not resurrect, there would be no such thing as Christianity. Because the reason Christianity is so popular and widespread, it all started with the disciples who started preaching the gospel, the life of Jesus, the testimony of Jesus. The gospels were written by eyewitnesses, people who knew and saw Jesus, and we can't say that about most other things in history at that time period. These are people that knew Jesus. So who would you believe more? If someone were to write a story about, let's say, you, and if it was a close family member, a close friend, that person's testimony is pretty credible because they knew a lot about you. Versus if someone who knew of you but didn't know you that well and only wrote about your life many decades or centuries later, it's not quite as credible as the person who actually knew you. Jesus Christ is risen. May God bless you.